The Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Ebrahim Patel, says lawmakers in the United States have taken the independent panel investigation into the docking of the Russian ship, the Lady R, seriously. He was reporting back this week on a trip he took to the US last week to discuss the African Growth and Opportunity Act, Agoa, with American officials. We're due to host the Agoa Summit in Sandton in November. Dr Gideon Chitanga is a research associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University. Dr Chitanga, good afternoon to you. I mean, at one point it seemed the US was really angry at us around the Lady R, the claim from the US ambassador that South African weapons had been loaded onto that ship. The Americans seem to have calmed down a bit. What worked to make them calm down so dramatically?
So I think we should start by reflecting on the shifting global multilateral relations. South Africa and Africa remains very important to the US and to the other parties. I think the issue of arms trade with Russia, whether true or not, they're just a small part of a bigger search for a new way of engaging with the African continent, and obviously a more inclusive way of engaging under Agoa that fits into the Biden administration's policy that is counted as a back-in approach to Africa. And if you think about that, there's a lot of debates, I think, in various structures and levels of power brokers in the U.S. policy system about how the U.S. can reboot its policy, growing competition from China, which looks to be way ahead in terms of its engagement and robust relations with the continent. So, in my view, this was a small issue that was pushed by the hawks in different structures of U.S. administration, but there is interest that is motivated by new emerging trends, a search for a way to re-engage with the African continent and with South Africa, specifically in forging better relations with the continent. That is the major motivating factor. So the Agoa discussions, which will be held, I think, in the next month, in November, they will provide an opportunity to basically re-engage and to look at better ways of building and forging more constructive relations between South Africa and the U.S., but more importantly, between Africa and the U.S.
So are you suggesting then that the Americans realize that, yes, we as South Africa may need them for economic reasons, for diplomatic reasons, they as the United States need South Africa too?
Absolutely. For both diplomatic and economic reasons, there's a lot that is changing quite quickly. If you look at the quantities of trade between the U.S. and South Africa, and you look at the same between South Africa and China in the past decade, you will see a huge leap for China to about 20.5 billion, and the U.S. still hovering around 14 to 15 billion. I would argue that the U.S. has had the longest relations with apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa, and has had huge opportunities to probably be in a position to have higher trading figures. The other thing is the Agoa policy framework has a lot of conditionalities that African governments, including the South African government, really resent, view as intrusive. The diplomatic tactics, African governments, including South Africa, view them as coercive. And the other side of emerging relations amongst emerging powers, either within the framework of the BRICS or the FOCAC or the BRI that are led by China. They are softer. They look to be more inclusive. There's a sense in which decisions are made through rapprochement and consensus. There is also bigger demographics that look to swing leverage to these countries, which in the past 2 or so decades were not seen as important in multilateral efforts. Previously, in the past months, President Ramaphosa led a delegation to Ukraine and later to Russia to offer a vision of ending the conflict there. So these activities point to, I think, a nuanced picture of multilateral diplomacy beyond coercion, the use of military and economic power, to a framework that should seek dialogue and multiple partners in advancing different causes. And I think the US is increasingly becoming aware of that it has fallen behind or lost ground in the global south because of resentful, coercive diplomatic approaches that it seeks to dangle its economic or political power or military power instead of using persuasion. And in my view, President Biden seems to be more inclined to more dialogue and engagement. There is also quite an interesting shift in recent American rhetoric in terms of profiling its interests with Africa in the context of mutual benefits, articulating a policy framework that seeks to advance infrastructure development, technologies, and so on, highlighting what are said to be African interests. And with that, I think more and more during the Agoa discussions, the main debates are going to be how to make Agoa resonate with contemporary interests and challenges and aspirations of South Africa, but also the other 36 countries that are participating in the framework.
So, Dr. Chitanga, I mean, would another way of looking at it be that, and I keep coming back to perhaps the quote of the BRICS summits. It came from President Vladimir Putin. Speaking virtually, he said that Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, had showed, I think the phrase was, masterful diplomatic skills in this. I think that was the right quote. In a way, did it work? So Ramaphosa played maybe a little bit of hardball. He said to the US, look at all the other friends that I have. And the US said, no, come back and play soccer with us instead. You can use our ball.
I think it's certainly working, and it's certainly the direction to go. The West has to appreciate and realize that the Africans of the colonial context are totally different from the emerging crop of Africans, which who seek to identify their interests, are good at defining their interests, and they are going to be pursuing these interests in softer ways, because none of the African countries can be defined as powerful in terms of structural power or military power. And they are willing to explore widely their interests beyond the United States, beyond the bigger Western bloc. There's a realization amongst African countries that they have a lot to offer, and other countries, I think China, which has demonstrated a willingness to work closely with the global south as part of the community of developing countries, Russia to a lesser extent, Latin American countries, India. There is a lot that is economically convergent amongst these countries, but it does not put them in a position where they can or should choose to say, we don't trade with this one or that one. So they seek to be non-aligned based on their interests and aspirations.
Dr. Gideon Chitanga, thank you. Research Associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University. Well, a lot more diplomacy to come also in the next few moments. We expect the Western